good morning to everybody present here today, as well as the team from Pretoria. And what I'd like to do on behalf of the team sitting here in front is start with just recalling why we're having the investment conference, talk briefly about who is coming to the conference, and share with the public some of the structure, the working sessions connected to the conference, and what we want to do after the conference. So thank you then, Ayanda, Program Director, for arranging the media conference. We feel it's important that we communicate with the South African public on an important announcement that was made by the President in the State of the Nation address in February. He outlined essentially a vision that says we want to be able to work in partnership with our own people, with investors, with workers to reignite growth and to boost investment. And one of the commitments the President made was to convene an investment conference. That conference has now been scheduled. It will take place between next Thursday the 26th and 25 October through to Saturday the 27th of October. And before I go into the conference itself, perhaps a stand back on what has happened between the SONA announcement and today. Shortly after SONA, government got to work to sit down with investors and see what are the impediments and challenges to boosting investment significantly in the economy. And members of the media would have seen over the last number of months many announcements on policy issues by government, whether they deal with spectrum or with making it easier for tourists to visit South Africa, or the signing of renewable energy agreements, or policy decisions in the mining sector that were a result of us ensuring that we create an environment of policy clarity, but also one in which jobs can be created on scale, so that ordinary South Africans benefit from this. The President also met with business people. You will recall, for example, his sessions with Mercedes-Benz is one example, and many others. He visited workplaces, and he traveled across the world to tell South Africa's story. After the discussions that we had with investors, we next used the BRICS Summit to provide an opportunity for investors and government agencies from our BRIC partner countries to hear the South African story and to meet South African entrepreneurs. We took the Chinese president, for example, to the CSIR to showcase the best of South African technology. And we launched, during the BRICS conference, if members of the media recall, a major new investment in Kucha in the Eastern Cape that resulted in the first new vehicle coming off the production line of a new factory that's been built there. After the BRICS Summit, there was the opportunity to share with all the countries on the continent at the FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, what is our storyline, and to begin to tell an African-wide investment storyline so that we attract the attention of investors more generally. The President announced a stimulus and recovery package, setting out what will be done in the next number of months to strengthen growth and to address the jobs and economic inclusion challenges we face. Thereafter, we had the Job Summit. The Job Summit was an opportunity for a partnership between business, labor, and government to say what workers through their trade unions, what businesses and what government officials will bring to ensure that we in fact create greater growth. But one of the issues that came up in all of that is how to unlock investment, because the commitment to jobs require that money must flow into fixed investment. So the investment conference is then an opportunity to take many of the discussions and issues that came up there and now talk to people with resources and money who can invest in South Africa. Next week we'll have the medium-term budget policy statement by the Minister of Finance, in which he will talk to the issues of the economy more broadly, as well as our growth forecasts, and he will also reflect on the stimulus and recovery package that the President announced and indicate how we are mobilizing resources to that end. And then of course we'll have the conference, and I'll talk about it being a series of working sessions. Shortly after the conference, we'll also have a number of investors across the world coming to an Africa conference of investment forum to take the opportunities we've identified in South Africa for cross-border transactions, for activities that draw together particularly infrastructure links so that we can boost trade in the continent. So we're going for a more coherent storyline. Instead of doing one thing and waiting a year to do another thing, all of this are part of now working in a very different way. So that's essentially the storyline that's brought us here. The conference itself will be a very practical series of working sessions. There'll be about 20 discrete activities and working sessions that will take place, ranging from 2 plenaries that the President will open and the President will close. But connected to those plenaries will be these sessions where you bring together investors in agro-processing, together with the ministers responsible for that area. Foreign investors, local investors, they'll try to work out what practically can be done to boost investment and identify opportunities in an area like agro-processing. And I'll talk you through what are some of the areas we're covering. We'll have about 50 or so investors, experts, people with knowledge of the sector speaking and contributing and leading the discussions in these various activities. And at the conference itself, which is next Friday, we will also have a series of investment announcements where companies will either take the podium and briefly tell the story of what they're committing to invest, or they will sign MOUs that give some sense of when the investment commitment will be realized. The sectors that we've chosen are a very big part of the South African economy. So while the investment conference will focus on the economy as a whole, we're also drilling down to a few key areas that we think there is scope to grow, and those areas would include agriculture and agro-processing, that whole value chain, mining and mineral beneficiation. We'll have a session on manufacturing, including advanced manufacturing, showcasing some new things South Africa is capable of doing. Transport infrastructure. There'll be a focus session on energy, one on water infrastructure. We'll group together tourism, business process services, film, all of those creative industries that represent so many opportunities. There'll be a session on information and communication technology, and we'll also have a working session on venture capital and entrepreneurship, creating opportunities for smaller players and bringing the power of investment to unlock the enterprise in townships, in rural areas, among young South Africans, among women. So that's the basic structure of the conference. It will also have The President will also meet with a group of global CEOs, brief them on the South African storyline, and finally on this Saturday, we will take many of the investors to the township. We are arranging, the President, you will know, one of his trademarks is to keep all of us fit with his walks, and we'll do a walk in Soweto around Vilakazi Street. He will bill that as the only street in the world with 2 Nobel Prize winners who live there, and it's a place that tourists ought to visit in large numbers. So if you're going to go to Kruger National Park, you're going to go to the waterfront in Cape Town, you should also go to Vilakazi Street. And that walk will help to open up opportunity for local businesses, entrepreneurs, small restaurant owners, B&Bs and so on, so that we bring economic activity that takes place in the township into the economic mainstream. And so that's one activity that we're particularly looking forward to. Now, who is it that we expect to come? And perhaps in briefly sharing with you that, let's recall why we're having the conference. We're having the conference to try to boost investment in South Africa. And that means giving investors a more coherent narrative about where we want the economy to go, where the opportunities are, how we're going to increase the rate of growth. And of course, South Africa's economy is the most diversified on the continent, so it becomes a key engine for growth on the rest of the continent. We have 58 million people, many of them, most of them young and vibrant, and it's really connecting young people to opportunity. We regard it more broadly as the gateway to the rest of the continent, and a big part of our policy objectives on the continent has been to create a single free trade area, a continental free trade area that connects 1.3 billion people, and that can give Africa the opportunity, the scale, the volume to be able to grow and develop significantly. So those storylines, identifying that, showcasing projects that we have opportunity in South Africa and we need foreign investors to come in, all of that will be the purpose of the investment conference. Who's coming? We're expecting between 800 to 1,000 delegates. In fact, it looks like we will reach the upper limit of what we've planned on. About 2/3 of the conference delegates are expected to be local business people, both large established as well as some of the emerging investors in South Africa. And of course, government will be there with regulators, state-owned companies, cabinet members engaging the investors. And about 1/3 will be foreign investors. There are delegates already from about 25 countries that have registered for the conference. And we expect that many of them will be big players. Let me give you some numbers to illustrate this. Just from the local players, already confirmed attendees of JSE listed companies, and we've just gone for some of the larger JSE listed companies. Their market capitalization is 6.5 trillion rand, and they'll be represented essentially by CEOs, board chairpersons, decision makers, in short, of the large companies. If we look at the South African fund manager community, people who have investable resources available and who need a horizon, a timeline that they can see how they will invest, we'll have virtually the entire South African fund management and asset management community present at the conference. and they have 7.7 trillion rand, excuse me, in assets under management. We also have the the largest. We also have the largest black industrialists in the country. Will all be present. You'll have many players. Thank you very much. We'll have many players that are either in portfolio investment, black investors in through the BEE arrangements, but also an increasing number of black South Africans who are actually running their own manufacturing businesses or tourism businesses or mining companies or companies in other sectors of the economy. We call them the black industrialists. From the from the international community, drawing from those 25 countries where delegates have already registered, 27 Fortune 500 companies have confirmed attendance. Those companies' market capitalization is in the order of about $4 trillion US. We will also be joined by 3 of China's top 4 banks. And we've got some big investors, both globally and locally, that will be attending. Among others, Jack Ma will be the keynote speaker at the business dinner that will take place on the Friday evening. And Strive Masiyiwa of Econet, one of Africa's largest investors, will also be present and active in the events connected to the conference. There will be an opportunity for foreign investors to directly interact with cabinet members, so there will be a lot of bilateral working sessions. And some of the large companies, I mean, just to give you a sprinkling, this is by no means a full list. We'll have companies like Airbus, Nestle, Huawei, General Electric, Siemens, Mitsubishi, Johnson & Johnson, many others coming here. Let me begin to conclude. The point of the investment conference is to showcase South Africa and to create a platform where we can land more investment. When we've surveyed the global landscape, we've seen that over the last, I guess, 8-9 years, there are many more national investment conferences being held. This has been a very competitive environment where countries showcase what is significant. You have United States has a major one, so to do most of the big economies, and we've counted about 40 of these big national investment conferences. This is South Africa laying its claim to be a significant destination for investment and a place where we can attract investment, if you like, a destination of choice that we seek to create. So this won't be the last conference. It's not a once-off conference. We will see this as a regular occurrence where the investor community will be able to engage the president and cabinet members. So the commitments that we make, we would be able at future conferences to be able to indicate how far we've come with those, and investors similarly, commitments they make. So it's a working session. The whole emphasis is to move away from the kind of gala events into practical working sessions where we connect opportunity and regulator, policymakers and investors. And that's what we will be doing next week very significantly. We've created a team of people, Invest SA, the Industrial Development Corporation, other agencies in government that will be working with investors. So they'll be present, they'll be actively working the conference. And when someone says, look, I want to invest in South Africa, we're going to connect them with a government official that will help to ensure that they are able to access all of the investment incentives that we have available, that they know who to speak to, and that we just get practical about investment. Investment is getting the right story, but it's also very much following up on the detail. So that, and just briefly, there's a lot more that Trudy would be able to add. She's done an enormous amount of work with her team. Anthony and Gerald of the team is also here, and they've really, I think, together with the Invest SA team, they've interacted a lot in the run-up to this conference. So the conference is really a point in a set of activities to unlock opportunity in South Africa.
Thank you, Minister. Any members of the panel would like to add? Ms. Trudy, you would like to add?
Thank you, Ayanda. I think Minister has adequately covered all the elements of the conference. That indeed it is linked to all of the other initiatives that government has embarked on, as particularly the Job Summit, and it is an avenue to mobilize resources to fuel our socio-economic development. I think it's important that we keep that end goal in sight. I think it's also important for us to re-engage with the investment community and to emphasize our role on the continent, serving the rest of the continent, acting as a hub, as a springboard in a way that supports the continental agenda. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think phrases that come to mind is more than a conference, it's working sessions, it's investments, announcements, hashtag invest in SA, domestic investors, international investors under the theme celebrating growth by building partnerships. So our questions should be around that theme. Let's ask the questions of how do we build these partnerships. Thank you. I will start with 5 questions here, cross over to Pretoria for 3, and then my panel will be glad to answer your questions. We'll start in the front, 1, 2, Ndenze, 3. Okay, should we take the 3 from Cape Town? Pretoria, do you have any 2 questions from there?
Thank you very much, Ayanda, and thank you to the panelists. Yes, we do have a question. 2, actually.
2, okay. Thank you. We'll start with you, Madam.
Hi, it's Carol Clayton of Business Day. Minister Patel and Sankaya, could you, what in your view is blocking investment at this point? And how will this conference unblock those things?
Hi, Minister Babalo here. Babalo here from Eyewitness News. Just in terms of foreign investment, I know the President was in Saudi Arabia in July. There's also, reports of the Saudi government showing interest in Danel. Are there any other similar investment opportunities, like the Danel one, for example, which is a state-owned entity? Are there any similar approaches or investment opportunities of that nature? Can we expect any? You mentioned that there will be a more coherent narrative on the country's direction. Thus far, has the narrative been kind of incoherent, uncertain, all over the place? And maybe just for Ms. Makaya, the President announced the $100 billion investment drive. I know the Saudi trip, I think there were talks of $10 billion just in Saudi Arabia, for example. Are you keeping score? Just out of interest, are you keeping score, and where are we in terms of that $100 billion that we are looking for? Thank you.
Sewam Konaze from Independent. To both the Minister and Ms. Makai. Labour has been saying for quite some time that local investors are sitting on a 600 billion rand cash pile and they are refusing to invest that money locally. Just wanted to find out your views on that and whether you'd be able to, or you have been able in your interactions with Labour or the business community to ascertain the levels of investments that could flow from local investors into the local economy. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the two ones from Pretoria. We'll take the two from Pretoria.
Thank you. We start with you, ma'am.
Antoline Silver from MoneyWeb. Minister, this all sounds wonderful and we will be creating jobs and all of that. But at the moment, it seems as if workers in South Africa are battling to get to work because something as fundamental as PRASA is just collapsing. Will the investment drive address these kind of crises that we experience in South Africa as well? Thinking of PRASA, Eskom and SAA and so forth? Or are we only looking at new investments in new sort of entities?
Minister, John Fraser from ZA Confidential. Really a backing up of a colleague's question from Cape Town. How are you assessing the scorecard of these investments? Will there be a regular report back on how you're doing with some sort of detail on what sort of projects the money is going to? Because there is some concern that lending money to Eskom is not necessarily the best form of job-creating investment. How are we and other experts in the world of economics and so on going to be able to assess whether you are bringing real job-creating investment into the country? And second, I gather that Winex is also taking place at the Sandton Convention Centre next week. Are you worried that some of your guests might be distracted by some of our excellent local wines?
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ian. I think we are fine from Pretoria.
Okay, thank you, Ian. John, while I'm not a consumer of the products at Winex, I hope they showcase a lot of South African products and that it helps to tell the story to investors that the opportunities in South Africa are very significant. But I think Carol's asked the fundamental question, which is, what's the problem we're trying to address? And as in all these issues, Carol, you'll know there isn't a single answer. There's a number of them, and we can't deal with all of them in one process, in one conference, but we can deal with many of them. So the first issue that has limited the level of investment has been issues of confidence. Business confidence, investment confidence, and more latterly consumer confidence. So the opportunity in the conference is to tell the story of what we're doing to address the causes of any confidence gap that there may be. Let me take the example, and it's a similar question to Babawa's one. Are we saying that our narrative is incoherent? If we want foreign investors to put significant sums of money into mining, as an example, the investment horizon, the gestation period between when, as a board, you sit and make a decision, and when you sink the shaft, when you begin to make money out of the extraction of ore, that's a considerable period of time. And so investors look to see that government has a longer term vision and that we are able to address, that they know what policy regime will be in place. So when the Minister of Mineral Resources makes an announcement on let's say, a piece of legislation, that gives investors a sense about where we're heading. Now, the conference is not where we will necessarily make all the announcements. In this particular case, we've made that announcement. But it's communicating that announcement more widely and showing it's not a once-off thing only in mining. That would be accompanied by announcements we're making to enable tourists to travel to South Africa more easily. And it would be connected to an announcement we would make that gives companies in the ICT sector a sense that additional spectrum will be available if they want to increase their level of investment in infrastructure around mobile telephony, but also the core areas of the economy, finance and others that are reliant on data transmission. So the conference is that opportunity to take many of the changes that we've already announced, some that we're in the process of finalizing, and bring all of that together, Babelwa, in a way that ordinarily an individual announcement by one minister isn't able to achieve. You need each of these individual announcements to be made, but there's a tipping point when people who may be skeptics say, okay, we see the big picture and we see on the whole it's moving in a direction that is seeking to grow the economy, create more opportunities for investment. And of course, South Africa has enormous social challenges. Investors are aware of it. And when they see government addressing those social challenges through job creation, there's a greater degree of confidence that comes in. So confidence goes together with policy certainty. The second part is repositioning the way in which we deliver economic services in government so that they more expeditious, that we live in a world where when you compete, people are going to see, can you get access to investment promotion agencies and incentives and infrastructure fairly rapidly. So we're bringing to the conference all of our key infrastructure providers, energy, transport. We're bringing the process, for example, of this world to the meeting, Transnet and others, so that there's a greater connection now between public entities and investors, so that it's not through a dialogue that ought to take place and that don't take place, but you connect people with problems, and they sit down with Transnet and they say, your rates are too high, or we can manage your rates, but the turnaround times to get our product to market is too low. So I think that's a second very big part, re-engineering government to operate in a way that will facilitate investment and the creation of jobs and economic opportunity. The third one is a number of investors have been talking to government agencies about making investments in South Africa, and they've had one or two problems, challenges. It may be with a regulatory issue. And the conference is a good point where there's pressure on the system to get the work done in time for the conference. So it helps to energize and catalyze government into doing things that ordinarily, if a chief director gets an application in the in-tray, it joins a long queue of others. Now you say there's a conference, we want to be able to make an announcement, it moves things. And above all, what it does is, it's like any market, it connects buyers and sellers. So the Minister of Energy will talk about the opportunities in the energy sector, and there will be investors in energy. We could, of course, have organized a series of bilaterals stretching over a longer period, but you bring together essentially the entire economic part of cabinet, in fact the whole of cabinet at a meeting like that, and you connect them with investors in an efficient way that the separate bilateral discussions don't achieve. I'm struck when I go to Davos that what Davos represents is the easiest opportunity to meet with the people that you need to meet. that it's not that it's only in the Davos that you can meet, but it would take an enormous amount of time to either travel the many different places where these CEOs live, or for them to find the time in their diaries to travel to South Africa. So you create a single marketplace where you bring, if you like, buyers and sellers together. And so the investment conference is not, and that's why we want to move away from a series of set speeches, very much working sessions. You'll see those 9 working sessions, the breakaway sessions, is the heart of the conference. And that's where the connections take place. The bilateral meetings between businesses and members of the executive, cabinet members, is where a lot of the important work will happen, because investors can then say, look, we can bring this amount of money, but we need to get a sense of whether you've got energy stability for the next 5 to 10 years. What are your plans? What do you think? So I think that that's how we see the conference, as the opportunity to bring all of these things together. The team, Minister Mokonyane, has been in cabinet where we've talked about this. She's also on the IMC on the conference, so she may herself also want to say what are some of the things we want to achieve, and of course, Trudy, feel free to comment on that. But while we're on these specifics, obviously, we hope you can come to the conference, all members of the media. So we don't want to use today to highlight announcements that will be taking place there. So if anything, this is as close to a teaser, but the real announceables will be on Friday. So we were working closely with members of the media to connect you to the stories that will appear there, including whether Trudy has tallied up the numbers. She said that she wants the president to be able to say something on that. So I think we're whetting your appetite to register for the conference. Mr. Makwenazi has raised a really important point, and you'll see in the numbers, we're strongly encouraging South African companies to come. Yes, we need foreign investment. They bring huge resources with deep pockets. They bring technology. They bring access to other markets. It's great. But South African investors have to lead the story of boosting investment here. And the president has met with investors. Some of the ministers have met with investors. And we're seeing an increasingly positive attitude towards unlocking investment. You'll see some of the announceables that will come out next Friday will be significant South African investors saying, instead of leaving money sitting in what you call a cash pile, bring it into productive investment. Let that money actively work. From the colleague, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, from MoneyWeb, you point to exactly the kind of things that we need to keep on fixing. PRASA is one example of it. In the past, it was the energy shortages. Now, public transport is absolutely critical. And I'm sitting in Cape Town, where it is even more underlined given the number of challenges that PRASA has had here. It's not confined to Cape Town, but it's a very strong component is in Cape Town. So the conference is not where we're going to fix all of it, but the conference is if investment gaps are the main challenges for infrastructure, to the extent that it's that, then the investment conference can address that. In the PRASA case, of course, it's not only an investment challenge. We do need to move with speed on refurbishing and renewing the rolling stock, but it's also issues of basic security around the trains and the management systems to make sure trains are on time so that you remove the frustration from the system. And my colleague, Minister Nzimande, is working quite hard now to try to turn that around. And the investment conference here will be in a session on transport infrastructure. I have no doubt that this issue of PRASA will come up there. If I recall, Trudy, we may even have one of the senior PRASA people on one of the panels, a working panel, where they can indicate what they're doing to address these kind of challenges. And John, on the reporting back on a regular basis, yes, we see the initial period would be, there'll be a 6-month period after the conference that we'll work very hard with investors who want to bring fresh investment to South Africa. The President will, of course, periodically report. I have no doubt that he would want to say something in SONA already. But within that 6-month period, we want to try to bed down expressions of interest and unblock any of the challenges of information, and where there are easy regulatory issues, resolve them. So that on a regular basis, we will be reporting. In fact, the team has proposed to us, and we're looking at the detail, to have a much more active web-based updating system. Anthony Costa, sitting at the back there from the IDC, has put together the suggestion that we bring a lot of the projects and put them on the web with regular status updates and so on. So we're looking at a proposal like that, because we think if we can have lots of positive examples like that, it will create its own storyline, and it also puts pressure on us, and we need to put pressure on ourselves to make sure that we move with speed as government, because very often at a big picture level, the storyline is positive, but when it comes to tying up the detailed issues that unblocks it, then the bureaucratic mindset kicks in. So we committed as cabinet to do what we can to change the mindset, to let government agencies and the bureaucracy know that it's in the country's interest that we get increased investment. It's not a favor we're doing investors. That jobs are created essentially through increased investment in the country. Could I suggest perhaps, colleague Mokonyane, you may want to comment, seeing that you have none. I look to my left, decked out in red. Trudy, Deputy Minister, also decked out in red, but only on the tie front.
I think they are communists. We should be able to take some. That's a good.
I mean, I think, just noting all has been answered. Just on the scorecard, as Minister mentioned, we're working very hard to come up with a mechanism that we have a good set of numbers that we can take everyone along with. I think in the way we talk about announcements, we should always be careful to indicate, and we will give you the information to empower you to indicate the status of that project, and that it's a journey along a pipeline. So there would be projects where money has come into a particular facility and it has been invested. There would be projects where, or investments where there's a commitment made, but the money hasn't flown into actual projects yet. There would be pledges that are made, but that once again have not gone through due diligence yet. And there'll also be project ideas that as government we would be happy to showcase on platforms, but we're not endorsing. These are ideas for investors, particularly private sector investors, to do their own thinking and their own due diligence. So I think it's very important as we talk about these investments that we're always very clear where on the pipeline we are, and we will provide that information. I just want to ensure that we don't get into, I can cover out and say this is the value of my 10 favorite projects. But I think we need to be clear what does that mean in terms of status and pipeline, and communicate that in a more effective way, so that there isn't, we don't mistake a pledge for an actual project that has gone through rigorous due diligence.
We'll take more questions. John, one.
One question.
Please start, Pretoria.
Yes, Minister, John Fraser again. Could I just ask you, I don't think the words land reform have featured so far in this news conference, but one does get the impression that it's an issue which concerns investors. What will the President and his team be able to tell people? When will there be final closure on this issue and a clear idea of where South Africa is going on this?
Good day, Ministers. Paul Vecchiota from Bloomberg. I just want to follow on a colleague of mine's question, Siyabonga, when you asked about the money companies have got in their bank accounts rather than investing it here in South Africa. And that's, for a company to keep money in a bank account is sort of like me keeping it under my mattress. It does no real good. So, Ms. Makau, what are you advising the President to do to make investment more attractive? In other words, the potential rate of returns bigger than they're going to get in the banks, but the risk is reduced. And I'm talking about risk on all levels: political, economic, social, labor, and so on. And then, secondly, VBS Bank. Geez, I've never received so many queries from various people as on VBS Bank. How are you going to mention and deal with this? People are worried that it could be a systematic risk to the banking system. Secondly, they're very concerned that it seems to be reaching right across the political spectrum here in South Africa. And then of course, on expropriation without compensation, people are still very concerned about that. How are you going to deal with these issues at the conference, Minister Patel and then Ms. Makaya, on what you're advising the President to reduce risk? Thank you.
Tawa, next, and then you next.
Thank you. My name is Thabo Mukoni. I work for the Sunday Times. Minister Patel and the Presidential Economic Advisor, to what extent do you think the politics of the past 10 years have been damaging to the economy, and to what extent was that, dispelling investors into the economy and the country? The announcements you are due to make next week, I hear you are saying that this is basically a teaser for what is going to happen next week. But are you in any position to give us, a monetary value attached to those announcements due to be made next week? Thank you.
Good morning, Marianne Merton from the Daily Maverick. South Africa's history with big investments tied to job creation and economic stimulus packages is not a happy one. The arms deal was meant to generate, the offsets related to that were meant to generate tens and tens and tens of thousands of jobs. Very little has indeed happened, and much of the approach by government and the relevant departments were eventually to sidestep, because project after project that had been promised simply didn't materialize, and the big job creation numbers failed to materialize. How will this conference be different? And you are talking about a scorecard. Where will be the guarantees to ensure transparency? How will you cooperate or facilitate cooperation? Because these projects will not happen at a national level. They'll be rooted in a province, in a town. You will have to rely on political, business, and other role players at that level. And unfortunately, certainly the last few years have shown us that the cooperation between the three spheres of government, never mind government and business, has not been the best, or has not reached levels where it could have and should have been. So talk to us to some of these, because how you would see and where you would want to go with that. Thank you.
No, thanks, Ayanda. My name is Manelisi Tubasa from the SABC. I was going to ask a question almost similar to that of Thabo. I was looking at the report last week, I think, of the Bureau of Economic Research that says that in the last 9 years of MS, we've basically lost about over R1 trillion just in taxes, and we've lost about 2.5 million jobs that could have been created. I mean, this is really, maybe it's understatement to say it has been a mess, really, because it's an own goal. I mean, we've been shooting ourselves, not even in the leg, in the head, basically. How do we come out through this mess? I mean, it's been done by us, and I'm saying by us, South Africa. You are right, Marie.
Thanks, colleagues. I think the Minister spoke about re-engineering government services to investors to create jobs efficiently. Over to you, Minister.
Well, first, thank you for the questions that the team has raised. Let me start with perhaps some of Paul's comments directly to Trudy. Trudy may want to take, as well as the questions that Marianne raised about how the conference will be different. I think the team's worked on quite a few practical things. So let me first give you an opportunity, Trudy, and then I'll also come back to some of the broader issues that the members of the media have raised.
Okay, so what's the difference this time is the question. I think you raised some very important points about transparency. Maybe to step back, I mean, a conference, it's just a milestone, and it's our first kind of national conference of the scale. But what it has helped us to do is to think about a whole investment mobilization infrastructure and how we do that and what lessons can be learned. So, for instance, we've been working with international multilateral institutions to help us understand what is the best practice, where we're falling down in terms of that element of policy. And in the run-up to the conference, we've been able to work together across agencies, as a team to put this together, but to also think collectively around, for instance, the issues log that investors have been feeding into us. We've had to think carefully around how specific complaints are resolved throughout the government chain. We've had an opportunity to also understand, and I think this talks to the other questions around, of course we want as much investment as possible, but how do we prioritize which sectors and what kinds of investments we would like to see? This is ongoing work, but clearly there are sectors in which we, as you can see, we've highlighted in the program, that have certain features that we would want to encourage to ensure that we do have those sectors that generate, that have a certain degree of labor intensity and export linkages. I'm not saying we have it 100% right, but in the analysis that has helped us prepare for this conference, we're beginning to have a greater sense of how we position ourselves in that investment landscape, both for domestic and international investors. So I would say, the conference has forced us to work closer together, to iron out some of the interagency and interdepartmental conversations that need to be had. It's forced us to think carefully about how, for instance, we develop a project pipeline. I'll be honest, it's very difficult, but in the exercise of doing that, we now understand, yes, this is how we communicate different kinds of ideas. This is the kind of additional work that needs to be done in terms of due diligence. This is how we bring in private sector expertise to help us through some of the issues. So I think those lessons will set us up to have a post-conference reflection that would include strategy around the key institutions for investment mobilization. Invest SA being the obvious example. There'll be a reflection and strategy and thinking work about how you reposition and make that work, the good work that's already happening, more effective. So I think that are the elements of some of that difference, but you'll see it in the follow-up reporting. The other issue that I think was maybe not direct. Okay, so then there was the question around de-risking investment. And I think the message that we've been bringing this morning, that the minister went into, is that, you know, we're bringing policy clarity and we're looking at the different elements that have blocked investments and thinking about how, as government, do you make the investment decision easier and, I suppose, less risky. So he spoke about the time frame, for instance, through which, you know, an investment project would live, and how we ensure that the policy message we give over the time period is consistent, and there's a sense that there won't be any unanticipated changes that threaten the returns that investors seek to have. Once again, that is obviously an ongoing decision, and you know, for business, but also as the economy, as economic performance solidifies, as we have a stimulus and recovery package, for instance, you'd also have a far more supportive environment for economic activity. That, of course, you know, is a risk and return question, and perhaps you lower the risk, but you also create an environment where returns are easier to reap. And I think all of these other initiatives, Job Summit, Recovery and Stimulus Plan, you know, the fiscal framework that will be outlined in the medium-term budget policy statement, all talks to also working on that return side of the equation. There was a question that wasn't addressed necessarily to me around VBS. And there was a point made about systemic risk, and I think that needs to be, you know, carefully handled, because that, you know, if you look at the numbers, you know, the Reserve Bank report is out there and you can consult with it, and also the Reserve Bank has been very clear on this, that this is not the kind of entity that presents systemic risk to the banking system. The transactional reach is not such that that would be the case. The size of the balance sheet is not that that there would be systemic risk. Of course, there are clear harms that have been created to depositors and those closely associated with the bank, but I think the systemic risk argument doesn't apply here.
Thank you, Trudy. The questions that Thabo and Manalisia asked, which essentially says missed opportunity over a number of years, a growth gap, a development gap as a result of that, where do we go from here? And I think from our point, I mean, we clearly see that the level of growth we've been able to get is significantly below both our own targets that we've set in the National Development Plan and what we need to be able to address the needs of our people. And part of the reason for that performance is clearly what you can call the political economy. Political issues play their role. So do global commodity cycles and a range of other factors, but we can't avoid the fact that there are things we need to do differently. So what is it that constitutes that? Well, first of all, you start with investment. You get to the point where you can turn around the growth story if you attract investment. But attracting an investment is not a function of a speech that the president makes. It's the practical things that flow from it. And I hope what we are able to show next Friday and Thursday afternoon to global investors is that we've, since February, since the State of the Nation address by the President, that we've taken the kind of steps to address the constraints to investment. So, as an example, if people want to invest in tourism, but the visa regime discourages them, that we've now addressed that. If there is capital that's committed to investment in energy, but agreements to sign commitments, off-take commitments have not been done, then we've resolved that. And I can take you through the list like that. So investment will be a function in part of saying we've created the right environment. The second thing is infrastructure. We've initially boosted infrastructure spending very actively up to about 2014, 2015. From about 2016, the level level of infrastructure spending decreased, and that had a negative impact on growth. And the stimulus package is a commitment really by the public sector that we recognize that. We've had fiscal challenges, we're trying to address that, but we've got to boost infrastructure spending. So that's the second level of it. The third one is skills development, that if we are to turn around the structural rate of growth, we've got to fix the political narrative, absolutely right, but you also need to be able to have many more young people coming into the economy with the required skill. It's the connection between that. When some years ago I sat down with Johan van Zyl, the then CEO of Toyota, and we said, at the time we were importing all the minibus taxis. And it was such a no-brainer, we should be making them here. And I said to him, what are the constraints? We identified the constraints, sat down, and we unblocked it. To date, we've now had two big companies assembling taxis locally. And if you had to look at the total number, about 66,000 taxis have been assembled. It's a fairly big number. If they all had to stand stationary at the same moment, and commuters had to all climb in, that's about 1 million commuters that could sit on the seats of vehicles manufactured in South Africa. But when I went on a tour with Van Zyl in the plant to see what needed to be done and subsequently what was done, one of the key issues was skills development. And they'd been able to find a way of taking young engineers, many of them black engineers, and turn them into absolutely world-class technicians, able to run a sophisticated operation in the assembly of vehicles. So on skills, what we're doing is we brought a lot more money to the issue. So fee-free higher education, whatever the fiscal challenges in the short term, if we can ensure that we get the right skills out of that investment, it would be an enormous boost to the economy. The next one is to diversify our industrial base. We're still stuck very much, like a few other commodity exporting countries, with our growth unfortunately tracking and sometimes underperforming the global commodity cycle. So part of what we're now doing is to focusing on practical ways of diversifying growth. And you'll see a few examples next week of a bigger shift now to the new economy, to services, to the opportunities around tourism. Yes, of course, manufacturing remains quite a key part of our thinking, but we are trying to unlock opportunity now across a much wider range of activities than before. Bigger markets matter. Capital will flow to big markets, all else being equal. So the attempt to connect the 54 African countries into a continental free trade area is an absolutely critical part of what we're doing. And then there's the governance failures. Governance failures on the public sector side, which has now led the state to change the board of Eskom and to replace the CEO of Eskom, change the board of Transnet, and in the process of replacing the CEO of Transnet, change the board of Denel, make changes that were at SARS, it's the subject at the moment of another process, and I can take you through the other examples. Because if we don't have integrity and a well-run set of public institutions, then we're not going to be able to achieve what we need to do. So there's this commitment by the President and Cabinet that we're going to turn that story around. The other part of it is also governance lapses and failures in the private sector. We've seen it with the big consultancy firms, and we've seen it with the collusion that the World Bank has estimated that our GDP could have been significantly higher, that some 10% of GDP equivalent is accounted for by essentially higher prices. In other words, the lost opportunity is represented there. So we can grow the economy much stronger if we have more competitive pricing in place, if we have honesty in the public sector by regulators and agencies, and we have honesty in the private sector by service providers and companies. It's not a topic that we feel we should be awkward about. We should be open about it. And as we deal with that, we must deal with the other issues too. Skills, and then opportunity for young entrepreneurs, black South Africans, women. Because you can get all of that right, but if you don't unlock many, I mean, if I look at youngsters, I go to any township and you meet with youngsters, they're savvy, they're edgy, they got an energy, they don't have opportunity to bring that into the economy in a sustained way. If you look at the lost dividend of women's exclusion from economic activities and relegating women in many cases to the subsistence economy, where people are essentially not able to contribute to GDP because they're locked out of opportunity. What do you need? You need capital and you need infrastructure. So what we're doing now in the Eastern Cape, the eastern part of the Eastern Cape, rerouting the N2, trying to get water into that area and expanding schools and clinics is an opportunity to try to bring people in the subsistence economy into the mainstream. So I'm giving a little bit of a broader answer, Thabo and Manalisi, to make the point that what you say, that there are gaps, that there are challenges, we've lost some time, is true. And we are reversing some of the areas that we recognize we've not got right. One of the areas that I've indicated that we felt we haven't got right was the uncertainty that there was in the mining sector. And that's now mining investors. We have a number of them coming next week to the meeting, to the conference, being part of the working session. I think they recognize that there's greater certainty in mining. Moving then next to Paul's question on land. I think, Paul, there's really two answers. The one is the President will no doubt want to deal with this matter next week, to share with investors our storyline and our timeframes, what we expect to be the processes that will happen here. We are a democracy. Parliament is seized on the matter, and we all agree the sooner we get to the point of finality on how we resolve the issue of land reform and giving black South Africans a deeper and more meaningful stake in the economy, the better it is, yes, for investors and also for South Africans themselves, for young people who must make decisions about their future, about women in rural areas who at the moment are scrabbling a living, and we see opportunity to bring them into productive agriculture. So it's not something that we would want to shy away from. It's something that we would need to openly and frankly share with the investor community and get their support, because we can only do many of the things that we want to do through a combination of legislative measures but also partnerships. And that brings me to Marianne's question, which is, what will you guys do differently? Is this another set of things that the hopes are high, but the delivery is a little bit more limited? And we looked at a few things that Trudy spoke about transparency. I want to speak about the partnership idea, because often in the public discourse it comes across as a kind of feel good, we're all happy, we shake hands, we take pictures. But the partnership idea we have is very different. It's a very practical thing that we unblock investment opportunity. That business must bring something. There isn't a free ride. Government must bring something. Similarly, there isn't a free ride. And it's by working together that we unblock it. So if we look at an investment project, and I'm not going to deal with the projects that will be announced next week, but if I take just one example, a few years ago, one of the big foreign investors approached us and said they wanted to set up a crushing plant for soya beans in Mpumalanga. and they needed some help and support to navigate the environment, make sure that they get land, that there's infrastructure, and so on. So we worked with them, and they set up a big plant. If you go through Standerton, you'll see it. It's a massive plant. You can't miss it. And then the IDC also invested in another company called Russell Stone, and we created this enormous practical thing, but it wasn't government departments that had to build factories and so on. What we needed to do was make sure the investor could get the land, they could get access to a water purification treatment plant, that they could access the soya, so that it was a combination of supporting black farmers to grow soya beans and encouraging commercial farmers to set aside some land for it. It was unblocking these kind of things. What's the result? The result of it today is we've just had our biggest ever soya beans crop. We are now a significant exporter of value-added products, not just raw soya, which we don't export because we now process them locally, but we now export the oils and the feed for animals and so on. Now, I'm giving that example. It's one little example of the kind of things that an investment conference is about. It's unlike an arms deal, which is an agreement between a government and a set of arms suppliers. This is a different thing. We're going to have hundreds of investors there, and their contracts are not going to be essentially with government. Some will be, but most of their contracts will be between themselves and their own workers. In other words, they'll be setting up a factory. It's not an offtake agreement with a government department. So I want to emphasize this private sector-led part of what we're putting up in the investment conference. This is not a bidding opportunity. It's not a super tender process at the Sandton Convention Center. It is saying to people who have money, here are opportunities in the South African economy. What do you need us to do to help you unblock it? And how can we get to the point where you invest your money and you get a return on that money? And in the process, how can we work with you to give opportunities to young South Africans, to women, to rural entrepreneurs, to black industrialists? And that was one of the, we can't copy any other country. Every path of development has got its own features. But it's very striking that one of the interesting parts of China's own road of development was the big role of joint ventures, where they got foreign investors to work closely with local entrepreneurs, in many cases in the public sector, in some cases in the private sector. We have a more vibrant and larger private sector. And what China got out of that is, beyond that initial wave of foreign investment that began to transform the Chinese economy after 1979, later waves have been Chinese investment, initially in China and increasingly to the rest of the world. China is now probably the fastest growing foreign investor on the African continent in size of investment. It's not yet the biggest, but it's the fastest growing one by a significant amount. And what it points to is the importance of getting local entrepreneurs involved in the storyline around growth and development. So I hope, Marianne, it gives a sense of what's different about this. And then I think that covers the questions that I could see. Deputy Minister may want to add to this or respond to some of the gaps in the reply. Deputy Minister.
No, thanks, Minister. I think that there's a question that is being asked. Do we think that the 9 years of our political economy had an impact? Was it negative or positive? And I think that it's important to emphasize that we are so confident that this conference and other things that we'll be doing going forward are going to be taking us forward. Why do we say so? It's because in the 9 years, there are very interesting lessons that you learn out of it. We have learned that when we talk and we listen to each other, we solve problems, and we also progress. If you can look at the 9 years itself, you can see how we've dealt with the issues of our financial crisis, and how we've dealt with issues, the challenges that we have in 2010 in terms of delivery of the stadiums, and we jovial and happy, all of us. It is in these 9 years that we actually came up with a national development plan. But what does it say again? It also says that when we don't talk each other, when we don't listen to each other, when we become arrogant about each other, we collapse. And we actually, all of us lose opportunity, both from the private sector and the public sector. And we believe that this process of dialoguing and interacting with each other give us an opportunity to know that no single one can actually rescue us from where we are. We need each other, and the issues around partnership become very much important. And that's why dialoguing is the best way of addressing your relationships, your trust, your confidence issues. And we believe that we can be able, because all of us as players in the 9 years, we know we have learned some lessons out of that. That is why when you look also on the issue of land, as the Minister was saying, we think that it was proper for Parliament, when it realizes that this thing was beginning to polarize all of us, and there were so many messages around it, to say, go and dialogue. Let's have the nation to dialogue like we did with the NDP. Let's go and dialogue. And we think that this process, as it goes forward and getting consolidated properly, and now putting in even scientific element out of it, will have a solution that is going to take us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. So let me, in bringing this part of the discussion to a conclusion, make the point that in the period that we're talking about, even where we've made progress, what they've done is they've underlined how significant the challenges are that we still need to meet. And I want to give you one example. In the last 9 years, Thabo, it's something that most commentators may find very interesting. We went into a recession in 2008 and emerged from it late 2008, early 2009. We emerged from it in 2009. We lost 1 million jobs. From the point where we recovered from there, we've now grown the number of jobs from October 2010 by about 2.5 million. 2.5 million net new jobs. We're now at about 16.2 million South Africans who are employed in the economy. So what we did, we started to compare that with population growth, with growth in the working population, and we also compared it with global employment growth. And what was very interesting out of this is, even if you take global jobs growth, we were doing pretty good by rate of growth. But at the same time, we have an enormous unemployment challenge. So being able to say, look, we've created 2.5 million jobs isn't a sufficient response. Of course, it's important to recognize we've done that too, but it's to say that our economy need to be able to create many more jobs than most other economies. We're going to be releasing, in due course, just a comparator on the job creation to give a sense of it. So I think what we take from the 9 years is where there's been successes, and we've had a net job growth from October 2010, as I've indicated, but we've also had many more young people enter the economy, and many rural people who were what the statistician general would call not economically active are now economically active. They've come into urban areas, they're looking for work, and they add to the numbers of the labor market. The labor market is people who with jobs and people without jobs. If you sit in Lusikisiki, and you're in the subsistence economy. You're very poor, but you're not employed or you're not unemployed. You're outside of that statistic. The minute you go to Nelson Mandela Bay or Buffalo City and you look for work, you become unemployed. In the long run, this demographic of young people looking for work is a good thing for an economy. But in the short term, it's an enormous social pressure to manage. And so they underline why we're having this investment conference and why we're at the Job Summit. It's we've got to lift the rate of growth of the economy, but also job creation significantly. So we will be making available at the conference some of the positives, many good things that we've achieved. I don't want to use today to highlight all of the positives. That will be done next Friday. But today is to recognize even where we've not been able to achieve what we needed to do, and to make the point that's why we're calling this a different way of working that you've seen over the last number of months.